This story was sent to me by one of my subscribers, and I wanted to share it on the channel. I was 16 at the time, a junior at a semi-private school and home alone for the week while my parents were on a business trip in Georgia. It was late October of 2017, and after a long day at school, I went straight to my PS4 to play Call of Duty Black Ops 3 with some online friends. Hours passed as people came and went from our matches. Since it was a Friday and I had the house to myself, I let the night stretch on. Normally, I went to bed around 9:30, but that night, 9:30 turned into 10, then 11, then midnight. My eyes grew heavy and blurry, partly from staring at the screen for so long, and partly because I was wearing contacts. When I finally checked the time, it was 1:20 a.m. I decided to finish the match I was in and head to bed afterward. That was when a foul, musty smell drifted into my room. It was so strong and rotten that it made me gag. I tried to ignore it, hoping it would fade if I kept playing, but instead it just grew stronger by the minute. Eventually, it felt like the stench was coming closer. Even with my noise-canceling headset on, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I reminded myself that the 3D sound feature could mess with my senses, so I kept playing. But then I heard tapping. I pulled off my headset, assuming it was part of the game, but the tapping came again. It was coming from the window behind me. The shades were down, but with the outside light on, I could see the silhouette of something standing there. It looked almost human. I froze, wondering if I was imagining it from exhaustion, until its head slowly tilted to the side like a bird, and it tapped on the window again in the exact same rhythm. Adrenaline shot through me. Still, curiosity pushed me forward. As I approached the window, the smell intensified, and I realized it wasn't just musty. It was the unmistakable stench of something decaying. I tried to convince myself it might be an injured animal, even though the tapping didn't fit. I forced myself to pull back the curtain. I wish I hadn't. A face stared back at me. Human, but wrong. Where its eyes should have been were only dark, hollow sockets. Its teeth were jagged and uneven, sharp enough to tear through metal. Its skin was rotting, peeling, and stretched over its skull as if it had been dead for a very long time. I stood there in shock, unable to look away. I couldn't tell whether it was looking at me or simply staring forward with its empty sockets. Then its head snapped to the side with a sudden, sharp movement. I screamed. The creature rose quickly, moving with unnatural speed as it retreated into the woods. I caught a glimpse of its body, twisted and contorted in ways a human body shouldn't move. I didn't sleep for weeks after that. I never saw it again. I only decided to talk about it recently because my class studied Native American cryptids, and one of them matched what I saw. The description of a skinwalker was almost exact, except for one thing. They usually take the form of the people they kill. Which leaves one terrifying question. Whose form was it wearing? I pray that I never see that thing again, because I don't know what would happen if our paths crossed a second time. Thank you to the subscriber who sent in this terrifying story. If you have a story to share, send it in and it might be featured next.
This story was sent to me by one of my subscribers, and I wanted to share it on the channel. This happened about 3 years ago. I was 10, and my older stepbrother was 11. Our dad and stepmom had just gotten married, and that morning we were home alone around 5:30 a.m. We were watching Netflix, but it kept buffering over and over. Being impatient kids, we decided to head outside and practice shooting our bows, something we did all the time. Everything seemed normal when we stepped out. The grass was covered in dew, and the sun was just starting to rise. We walked for about 2 minutes to the little clearing we used for our bow practice. After firing a few arrows, I noticed my stepbrother acting uneasy. He still took 2 more turns, but when it came time for his third, he suddenly went pale. "I think I'll sit this one out," he said. This confused me because he had been so excited to go outside. I took a few more shots, but then he grabbed my arm and pointed toward an old burn pile a short distance away. That's when I saw it. A white, lifeless-looking face was half peeking out from behind the pile. Me, my stepbrother, and that creature stared at each other for what felt like 2 full minutes. No one moved, no one breathed. Then, my stepbrother shifted his weight and stepped on a twig. The snap echoed across the clearing, and whatever that thing was reacted instantly. It let out a sound I will never forget, a screech that sounded like a panther being slaughtered by a screech owl. It was one of the most horrifying noises I've ever heard. We took off running and didn't stop until we were inside with the door locked. We stayed there until our dad got home, and after that morning, we refused to go outside alone for a very long time. It was a short experience, but it's something that will stay with me forever. Thank you to the subscriber who sent in this terrifying story. If you have a story to share, send it in and it might be featured next.
This story was sent to me by one of my subscribers, and I wanted to share it on the channel. I recently started researching skinwalkers. I've always been a horror fan, and body horror especially is what scares me the most. As I went through different encounters and legends, I began noticing unsettling similarities to something I experienced when I was younger. When I was a kid, I used to wander into the woods near my house with my dog. Each time, I pushed a little farther, exploring deeper than I had before. One day, I went farther than ever and stumbled across a strange, broken-down brick structure. It was only the size of a small shed, with 3 short walls about 4 feet tall. On the outside of the structure was a pile of deer skins. Inside, scattered across the ground, were deer bones stripped completely clean. Even though it was so long ago, I vividly remember there being no meat left on any of them. The whole place felt wrong. I grabbed my dog and ran home, deciding I wasn't going back into those woods alone again. Years later, when I was in middle school, a group of local kids came to me saying someone had seen something strange in the woods. Against my better judgment, I went with them. We made it deep into the trees when we noticed something climbing up a hill across the creek. The woods formed a V shape with a creek running down the center. We were on one side, and whatever this thing was stood on the opposite side. At first, it looked like a dog, maybe a greyhound or a hairless breed, because its fur was extremely short, almost non-existent. But something was off. It was pale, lanky, and the way its body moved was completely unnatural. The hind legs seemed normal for a dog, but the front legs bent in a way that reminded me disturbingly of a human crawling. Every movement looked disjointed, twisted, and wrong. It struggled to climb the hill. The fallen leaves kept making it slide back down, giving us a clear view for several long seconds. Even though it was broad daylight, the sight of it made our stomachs drop. Without even speaking, we all turned around and sprinted back toward the neighborhood. We never talked about it again, and I've never gone back into those woods since.
In reality, we were only a few minutes from houses in every direction. So logically, maybe it was just an injured dog, something that had gotten hit or sick, and fear made it seem worse. But the deerskins, the bones, the unnatural movements, they still haunt me. And that's why I'm sharing this now. I'd really like to hear what others think, because part of me still wonders if what we saw wasn't a normal animal at all. Thank you to the subscriber who sent this terrifying story. If you have a story to share, send it in and it might be featured next.
This story was sent to me by one of my subscribers, and I wanted to share it on the channel. I live in northern Utah, not in Navajo Nation, but only about 3 hours from the infamous Skinwalker Ranch. For reference, my neighborhood sits at the very top of a mountain. The entire area is carved into the mountainside with houses and yards making up the only clearings. Everything else is thick, dense forest. I've never been afraid of the mountains. I'm a young girl, but the only things that ever worried me out there were other people and the occasional cougar. I've spent countless nights camping in the mountains with my dad's dog or a friend. Darkness doesn't bother me, and neither do forests. Being pagan and deeply spiritual, nature is where I feel most connected. The outdoors is usually the only place where I feel completely at peace. Because of that, anytime I don't feel safe in nature, I take it seriously. One night after work, I got home around 10:30 as usual. The drive up the mountain felt different this time. A heavy uneasiness sat in my chest the entire way up. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that my fear of skinwalkers and similar entities sometimes attracts the feeling of being watched. I always try to shake those thoughts off the moment they appear, but that night, I couldn't shake them at all. The moment I parked, I felt an urgent need to get inside. It was that overwhelming, horrible feeling you get when you're certain that if you turn around, something awful will be right behind you. I didn't want to stay outside for another second. I ran straight from my car to my back door, locked everything, and tried to calm down. Nothing happened that night. Everything seemed normal. But the next morning, I stepped outside and found a bone fragment lying near my porch. It wasn't human. It was probably from a deer or another large animal. But it was old, dry, stripped clean, like it had been sitting out in the open for a long time, and it hadn't been there the day before. I would have seen it. What unsettled me even more were the markings carved into it, strange lines and shapes scraped deep into the surface. I don't have a dog, and there's no reason an old carved bone should have shown up overnight. Nothing had dug it up. It was simply there. The uneasy feeling I'd had the night before suddenly made too much sense. I spoke to some Navajo friends afterward. They told me they'd heard stories from elders about skinwalkers leaving carved bones as a form of curse or warning. I don't know if that's what this was. I hope to everything that it isn't. But finding that bone after the fear I felt the night before, it still chills me to think about. Thank you to the subscriber who sent this terrifying story. If you have a story to share, send it in and it might be featured next.